Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our How Did They Get Here? I think it's a very funny topic today, but I want to welcome all of you. We made it to December 1st. I can't believe it. The meteorologist's first day of winter, technically. I learned that this morning from a meteorologist friend of mine that December 1st through February 1st is what they consider winter to be. So welcome to our UH2U webinar this afternoon. We're so glad you could join us here. We hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday season and are getting ready to enjoy a wonderful upcoming holiday season as we are towards the end of the semester here at the University of Houston. My name is Mike Paday, class of 1989. I'm the AVP for Alumni Relations here at the university and your host, your moderator, your Keep Them on the Rails guy today, as we have two very dynamic University of Houston alumni joining us from Washington, D.C. and from Houston, but from their Washington, D.C. Space to join us today to just give you a little information on how they got here. And what we mean by that is, we talk a lot at the University of Houston about networking and that there are 305,000 alumni of the University of Houston all time. 290,000 of those are living. 175,000 of those live here in the great city of Houston. But that means there are 75,000 of their alumni all over the country that are wandering the woods looking for each other. And we happen to find two today that wandered the woods and ran right into each other head first. And they have some great stories to tell you. So I want to welcome in Holly Ham and Brian Montgomery, two of our alumni who have joined us today to talk about how they got together in the business sense and how they are working together and how the infrastructure and the interworkings of Washington, D.C. brought these two University of Houston alumni together just a short time ago. So I know I want to have Brian and Holly introduce themselves. I want to also give you all a few notes as we go along. One, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat and we'll try and ask that as we go along. We also will have some questions at the end. If you have a question, we trust our group here at the University of Houston. You'll be welcome to chime in and raise your hand and be able to ask that question live. And we have also, this event is being recorded. So I want to welcome all of you that are watching the recording of our event today. We thank you for joining us here on our UH2U program. And you can find all of our other UH2U webinars dating all the way back to when we started this program well over 2 years ago on our website at houstonalumni.com. So having said all of that, we're going to have just a robust conversation today. I know it. I've gotten to know Brian and Holly over the last couple of weeks as we chatted prior to our webinar today. Holly's been in town a few times. Brian, I haven't had the chance of getting to shake his hand face to face just yet, but that is coming. Unfortunately, Brian, it looks like the Cougars will not be in the Military Bowl in Annapolis. Somebody else took that spot. We were kind of pulling for that, but we may end up in another spot where we get to meet face to face very soon. So welcome to both of you. I guess it's still good. Well, no, it's good afternoon here in Houston too as well. So good afternoon. And why don't we have each of you introduce yourselves? I know, I'll throw it out there to start with ladies first with Holly. I know you're a Bauer College alum, but just give us a little background on how you got yourselves into the Washington, D.C. infrastructure system, as we'll call it.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, thank you for having me. And Kendra, thank you for the coordination and really getting me and Brian to this point. And we do have, it's just amazing how the world happens and how two people out of hundreds of thousands can meet in a specific space, and the work that we did then and the work that we're doing now. But Mike, you're right. I'm a proud Bauer graduate, BBA in '94 and MBA in 2004. And the journey has been really amazing. I think back about my university days as an undergraduate and my involvement at the university, my involvement at the Bauer College, and really the wonderful classmates that I met, the professors, the assistants. But how I got here probably started absolutely with my experience at the university, on the university campus. Leadership roles in volunteer organizations, bake sales, car washes, the people that you met, that I've met, and just, who I've learned from and who I've just asked to guide me along the way. So I'll touch on mentors and, personal boards of advisors, but I think that has really helped me throughout my career. So it was a long time ago, but I took my first job actually in Finland, and it was a University of Houston program that brought me there. And from Europe, I came back to Texas and had some other roles. But what really took me to Washington, D.C. was completely unexpected. And I think you have to be prepared for those things in your life. But the unexpectation also has to do with taking calculated risks, looking at what are your other options, and really sometimes making a leap, knowing that you don't have all the information. Yes, there are risks, but boy, what of an impact you've had. So I do want to touch on that later on the discussion on how to learn, how to really calculate those risks for yourself. What is your measurement? How do you really decide this is what I want to do, what I don't want to do, and how does it impact your career, family, location, and all of that. But I did get involved. I went from private sector and then into public service, and it has been an amazing journey to really understand the impact that public servant does. Public servant provides in what we do, to serve, whether it's students, homeowners, the economy and small businesses. So I have a lot of experience in that. But I want to pause there because I, do want to give my colleague and, an esteemed colleague, I have to say, because I've admired Brian, I've heard about Brian, but I had a chance to meet with Brian, and then, we just really clicked and then had the opportunity to work together. But Brian has had his journey in DC much longer than I have. And then, spanning 4 different administrations is quite admirable. So Brian, over to you for an introduction as well.
Well, thanks, Holly. Thanks, Mike and Kendra. And greetings from Alexandria, Virginia. I wish I was in Houston. I'm looking forward to getting down there after Christmas. So, Holly, it's a polite way of saying I'm way older than you are. And I've been blessed to work for 4 presidents as a political appointee. When I was on the University of Houston campus, I will readily admit I didn't think I'd work for 1 president of the United States, much less 4. So it's been quite a journey. I worked for Bush 41, as we refer to him, George H.W. Bush first. Of course, he lost. I moved back to Houston. I came up the second time with George W. Bush. And I'm one of those folks who say, well, as soon as his term's over, I'm heading back. Well, of course, his term was over in 2009. And here I still am in the Washington, D.C. area. I was blessed also, even though obviously based on my presidents I worked for, one would say I'm a Republican, but I was also a political appointee for Barack Obama when the administrations changed. It was right there in the housing crisis, the financial crisis. So the incoming HUD secretary, who I knew, Sean Donovan, asked myself and another gentleman to hold over. That's the term when you stay on into another administration. At the end of the day, I'm an American, right? And the partisan stripes don't matter at that point. So I was honored to serve in Barack Obama's administration also for 6 months. And then later on in the Trump administration, which is where Holly and I were able to meet. So I'll pause there for now.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So Brian, in our meeting prior, you tagged yourself kind of as an idealistic 23-year-old who went into this business. Give us a sense of what that's like when you left the University of Houston and how you got your first jump into that space. I mean, you're 23, you jump into that space. What is that like? Sure.
Well, I was originally working in the energy industry, but was a member of the Young Professional Republican Club there, more to meet people. And I met this gentleman who's Latino, who we've been good friends since then. I happen to be half Latino, although it's not readily apparent. My mom's side of the family, we just sort of hit it off. And he was doing what was called advance work, which are these teams of volunteers that put together events for presidents, vice presidents. And I, of course, had never heard of this. This was in the late 80s. And anyway, I kind of got hooked to it as a volunteer and took a leave of absence to work on the 88 campaign, which was a long time ago. And then ended up moving up to Washington, D.C. to work, as I mentioned, for George H.W. Bush. And a couple of years after that, when I moved back to Houston, I get a phone call that George W. Bush was running for governor of Texas. And they asked me to come work on the campaign. And I guess the rest is history at that point. So at that point, I moved to Austin and worked for him while he was governor, while George W. Bush was governor of Texas. And of course, later when he became president.
So Holly, the title is "How Did We Get Here?" And you talked about when we were meeting earlier about public service and the importance of public service, and that I think people might look at public service differently as politics, and public service and politics are not the same, right? Politicians are one thing, public service is a different thing. Can you maybe put your thoughts about that? What the difference between the two is?
Absolutely. And as by way of background, I have a BBA in MIS. I was a techie. I started my career as a software engineer. I like data and I like bits and bytes and doing code. But then, my career took me to more business operations and understanding everything from sales and marketing to finance and just really very strategic thinking. And so in terms of, career pathing, I was always a business person. I worked for large companies. I worked for small companies. I worked for for-profit companies. I looked at that as, okay, this is where I'm going to take my career. And I looked at also career pathing and, where do I want to take my goals? But after 22 years with that IT type of career, either from very technical to when I actually left in 2016. And I was with a company called EDS that got acquired by HP. And when HP divested a portion of the business that was former EDS, I was offered early retirement, and I took that in the summer of 2016. It was a way for me to say, Mike, okay, let's take a breather. I've had this great career. Where do I want to go? But then opportunity knocked, kind of like with Brian. You meet people, and also through my network. It was through my network that I got a call in the summer 2016, and the question was, can you go and help set up a call center in San Antonio for the Trump campaign? And because, I wasn't thinking about serving in a campaign, they just know that I have the skills to set up a voice over IP call center in San Antonio, maybe help with some of the data and help with some of the training. And so I did offer to do that. But I have to say, when you do something well, they know that you can do other things well, right? Whether to set up some phone calls, read some data, do a spreadsheet. But also, I didn't think about public service. I didn't think about public service. I didn't think about the politics. I did think about how can I help my country. At that time, I had 2 young children, and I think about their education. I think about their safety. I think about what kind of world they'll grow up when they're ready for middle school, high school, and then as a young adult. And then I also realized, wow, there could be some changes, but I wasn't really thinking of public service, Mike, until I went to DC. And then I looked at policy, and I'm not a policy person per se on education or commerce in terms of what the department did. But when I was asked to serve in the Trump administration, the first question is, where do you want to work? Meaning, what agency do you want to serve? And if you are a policy wonk on education, for example, it made sense. But then there are other agencies that have niche education. So then, I was very privileged to be, just asked so that, it's just not taking my name and then placing it in some office that I may not be very happy with. And so given my business background, it could be applied anywhere. But then I had a choice. Do I want to work, for example, in the executive office of the White House? It may be a specific agency because I know who's going to be nominated as a cabinet secretary, so on and so forth. And so I chose education as my top agency because I wanted to do everything I can because education was so important for me at that point. Little did I know, though, that as soon as you start serving, in a way, you're serving, for example, 50 million public educated students, another 15 million charter and private school. Then you think about the tens of thousands of teachers, assistants, administrators. Public service really hit me when I had to make, I had to sign a document. It's basically a statement that says, you're going to do this in the agency because it impacts the program offices. And so for me, I would say, Mike, that's when it really hit me that as a public servant, I'm serving myself as a parent of school-aged children. I'm serving the teachers, I'm serving the administrators, the assistants, and higher institutions, higher ed institutions. But I really, really liked it. Meaning, yes, there's a lot of sacrifices. right? The compensation is not the same if you've had 2 decades. I was in a very different business. There were very, very different challenges. But I went home every day knowing that I had an impact on a family, a student, in education, privacy rights, EOC. And that to me, no matter how, how challenging the day was, I felt really proud that I was serving that family, that school, or just serving the nation.
Wow, that's an incredible, just how you put that out, that it's not, it's about the service and the policy, not about the who's telling you what to do. It's
right.
The head of state is one thing, but the optics that the head of state just tells everybody what to do is just not true, right? You have the departments that do their thing. And Brian, your time at HUD, right? I tried to write some of these down because there were so many. HUD, Commerce, Labor Department, some of the other places that you've been. In the time that you've been there, give folks a little insight into what, I mean, you mentioned to me an incredible number that the HUD affects 40 million people a day. And give us a sense of what HUD does generally, what your role was there, and what the most rewarding part of that was for you.
Sure. Well, prior to going to a cabinet agency, I worked in the White House, as I mentioned, for George H.W. Bush. And then I worked in the White House for George W. Bush for 4.5 years, running the Office of Presidential Advance, which, by the way, allowed me to log about 500,000 miles on Air Force One. People ask me if I miss it. Yes, I do miss traveling on Air Force One. And then I ran the Office of Cabinet Affairs for 2.5 years, where you're the sort of the intermediary between the president and cabinet secretaries, mostly on the domestic policy side of the house. Although, we helped stand up the Department of Homeland Security. So I interacted with cabinet secretaries every day, typically the kind of an early warning system, trying to keep stuff out of the public domain, if you will. But after that, I got over to HUD. This was 2005 to 2009 as commissioner of the Federal Housing Administration. I had already at the White House had been through things like 9/11. I was traveling with President Bush on September the 11th. Dealt with multiple hurricanes in Florida. Of course, I get over to HUD, and Hurricane Katrina was literally 3 weeks after I'd been FHA commissioner. And then we had this thing called the housing collapse, the financial collapse in 2008. And I was ready, at that point to hang my spurs up, as I mentioned, when the Obama administration asked me to stay. So like Holly, I've gone in and out of government and the private sector. And while I dealt with Commerce and Labor departments a lot, I only worked at HUD. And again, during the Trump administration, kind of reprising my role as FHA commissioner, which to Holly's point, the FHA helps 8.5 million families, multiply that by 3. HUD, through its many subsidized housing programs, community development programs, helps another 25, 30 million. So the number is quite large. I mean, Holly's point's a good one. You're making decisions that impact millions of people, and you want to make sure you get it right. And there's rules you have to follow. Everybody, of course, thinks you want to do legislation, but there's the Administrative Procedures Act and rulemaking, and it's a very complicated, long process, allowing people to obviously express their opinion. So we were rocking along in the Trump administration, doing what, at HUD, what we need to do. But of course, we had this global pandemic, and we just kind of threw the rule book out and just started on the fly making changes to the way HUD conducts business, because there were millions of people counting on us. And I tell you, it was refreshing for a period of time to see the bipartisanship when the pandemic first hit. We were getting calls from the Hill every 10 minutes about the CARES Act, later on other assistance programs. And we were telling Congress, well, you may want to do it this way. Of course, they would do it the opposite way. And, but, it was great to see everybody, everybody rowing in the same direction for once. So it's very refreshing. And to my earlier point, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat. If you have the opportunity to work in a presidential administration, I would do it. I mean, it's been an amazing experience. I've flown all over the world, been to places, been into war zones, been into the government sites that most people don't even know exist. again, something I never envisioned when I was at the University of Houston. And I'm no different than everybody listening in today. I got lucky, sure, I worked hard. But to Holly's earlier point, take some chances. You've always wanted to go work for a president, try, right? Work on their campaign, apply if they get elected. I'll tell you, won't regret it. It's been an amazing experience, and I have no regrets whatsoever.
Well, I'm not going to let you slip by because I know it was on my list. Having worked for George W. Bush during 9/11, do you have a story you'd like to share of that time, that tragic time? But I'm sure there was some very uplifting and inspirational things that went on in that time for the country.
Well, we certainly that day we were down in Sarasota, Bradenton area, at a elementary school talking about No Child Left Behind. And as we're pulling up in the motorcade, we get word that one plane's at the World Trade Center. And we had two military aides with us because we had an overnight and had picked one up from Jacksonville where we'd been the day before. And we had the chief of staff with us traveling, which wasn't always the case. And we had a backup personal aide. So it's kind of an odd but small mixture of staff that don't normally travel. So it was lucky that we had two mill aides that day. And there's so many things that went on that day at the school when we, were there when the second plane hit. Secret Service trying to get the president out of the school. They were worried about it. Someone left some radioactive element, that they left a biological or chemical agent. Was somebody trying to crash a plane into the school? And so we got out of there. We were in the classroom, went to the auditorium, and then we hightailed it out of the school. And I would say the one thing I remember in particular is Air Force One is a 747. That day we took off like it was an F-18. I'd never believed that a 747 could take off like that. I mean, we weren't even strapped in, and just took off like a rocket. And I mean, later that day, after we went to Barksdale Air Force Base and then to Stratcom at Offutt Air Force Base, we're down way underground. And I'm sitting there going, this is like a movie set. I mean, but this is the real thing. And, we went to the Pentagon the next morning. I was over there twice that day. That was pretty grim, to be blunt. And then, of course, Bush went to the ground zero on that Friday. And I'm standing about 10 feet from him when he's holding the bullhorn, and everybody's chanting, USA. And it was really moving, really moving.
I bet it was.
Sad, but inspirational.
Yeah. Out of all those tragedies comes a side of the country that you've been waiting to see. You know what I mean? So we talked a little about each of you and how you got your way to Washington, D.C., but tell us how you met, how you got together in a business sense, and where you ran into each other and how that occurred. I talk all the time to my students when I teach a communications class over in the Hilton College, and anybody that knows me is I'm all about networking. I'm all about take a chance and meet somebody. I'm all about pick up the phone and they wear the same alumni colors as you do. You have, if nothing else, the president likes to say, you might be from UT, or you might be from Baylor, or you might be from Syracuse, but if I cut you open, your blood is red, right? So if you have red and white, you're good. In your case, you're both alumni of the University of Houston. Had you run into each other before Washington, D.C., or how did that occur? Holly, you look like you've got the biggest smile about a good story. So why don't you start about how the two of you ran into each other and formed this little network that's going so strong?
Mike, there's always a half degree of separation somewhere, right? And I knew, Brian and I were meant to meet sometime in our lifetime. And the other is, the world is really small, geographically as well as just in industries. And, anything inside the Beltway is really small. So I was the executive director for the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. The Bowers in DC program, this, about 5 or 6 different Bowers students spend the spring semester in DC. They also intern. And so I was asked to participate. I was invited to participate at a reception. Brian was there, along with probably another dozen or so, and maybe a couple of dozen other guests. And so, we went around, introduced ourselves, and I'm thinking, how do I know Brian Montgomery? And if I don't know Brian Montgomery, I need to know Brian Montgomery. And so we started talking. I got that right, Brian? So that was in February 2018.
Yeah.
Because I remember it was
a-
early on in the
Yep.
administration.
Yep. Well, we got around the room. By the way, my degree from University of Houston is in political science. And I had the equivalent of a minor in what used to be called the College of Business Technology. But the reason I was at the Bowers School is because I think the world has too many politicians and not enough business people. So I started giving money to the Bowers School. And so everybody kind of laughed because I told them what I'm telling you. I said, well, I'm actually a political science major. But so, yeah, Holly and I just met each other. And I guess the rest is history.
And
So
it
tell us
was,
go ahead, Holly. Go ahead.
yeah, definitely the rest is history. And, I just want to make a comment about networking and meeting people. I think we all do that, passing out business cards in the old days, just a couple of years ago, or, social network and LinkedIn. But I think the most important thing that I've learned, even though I've got hundreds, if not thousands of colleagues and associates, is how well do you maintain that network? And that can be a full-time job. But you really have to be conscientious, right? And Brian was one of those individuals where, okay, there's a commonality already, right? We're from Texas, we're from Houston, we wear Cougar red, we're at the same event. By the way, we're also working in DC and we're doing, our own things, but there's a shared mission. But then it does take a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort, and it's very, very hard to develop a relationship, maintain it, and strengthen it. And I think, through my career, I've been very fortunate to just have a gut feel, right? This is someone that I think I can maybe support in some way. Maybe he can support me. We can work together. And I just want to fast forward to now. We both have left the administration. I'm back in private sector. Brian, if I can just share, Brian is now the chairman and founder of Gatehouse Strategies. I'm the chief growth officer of Precise Software Solutions in Rockville, Maryland. What are the chances of us working together? Well, I think because we've developed that relationship, and then I also worked for Brian at HUD in the last 9 months that I was in the last administration, we found ways to work together. So it wasn't just by chance that we met, because on any basis, you're meeting lots of people, especially in professional networking events. But it's really, how do you strike that need and desire to continue that? And I think Brian and I saw that. I highly respect Brian for not only everything that he's done, but he's really a visionary. He understands it, and just like a lot of great leaders, he surrounds himself by people that can help one another, impact one another. And so we're finding that his organization and my company are working together. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do in the housing space. And then Precise is an innovative IT company. And I think we can marry the two with IT innovation, technology services with housing.
That's fantastic. So those of you that are listening, we've gotten to the bottom of the hour, which means it's time for me to at least make a call for questions. If you have a question, you can go ahead and either put it in the chat or raise your hand that you have a question. We'll certainly call on you. We do want to remind everybody that you please stay on mute. You can put your cameras on, but please stay on mute if you're not asking a question. We haven't had, good news is, Brian and Holly, Kendra and I laugh. There's usually something funny happens during our webinars. We haven't had anybody's cat crawl across the screen yet. We haven't had a kid come and ask for a cookie. We haven't had any fun stuff happen yet. So I want to knock on wood. Maybe that will happen. Maybe it won't. But there's always something fun. And Brian, I told you this last time, I could probably spend an hour just asking you all the artifacts on the mantle behind you. Like, you have probably stories about every single, there's a shuttle there. I'm sure that has a story. I mean, I'm a little concerned about that Longhorn helmet up in the top right corner of your bookcase there, but we're gonna let everybody else bring that up. I'm only just giving you a hard time because right now the Cougars are 11-1 and the Longhorns are 5-7. So yeah, that's all that matters, right?
Well, I was blessed to go to two very good schools, so I count myself as.
I understand.
I consider myself lucky in that respect.
So I see Gio has a question, and I think Peter, did you raise your hand as well? So we'll come to you second. Okay, so Gio, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks, Mike, and Holly and Brian. In the spirit of networking, I appreciate you accepting my LinkedIn connection request. leading up to this webinar. So that was great.
Thanks
And
for sending it.
Holly, greetings on behalf of the Bauer College. We're really proud of all of your accomplishments. And I just wanted to mention that before the question. So I promise this is not meant to be a political question, but I'd be remiss if I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to have you both here. I'm a current Master of Public Administration student here at the University of Houston. I also work here full-time at the university. I'm learning currently about a theory that's dubbed politics administration dichotomy. And basically the theory states that there's boundaries that exist between elected officials and also, current public administrators. So I'm curious if you all want to kind of opine on that dichotomy, that theory. Does it exist? And yeah, I'll shut up and listen.
Well, if I understand your question, Giovanni, are you talking about that exists between the political side and the career side of well, I just say absolutely, and that's a very good question. And Holly's nodding her head, yes. You cannot succeed without the career staff. And, a lot of people that come into an agency under one administration come back later with another administration. And the career staff, by and large, stay the same. And, let's say an agency like HUD might have 120 political appointees. They've got, 10,000 career employees. And, and you've got offices all over the country. HUD's a relatively small cabinet agency compared to, DOD or even Commerce or Labor. So, I'm a firm believer when administrations change hands, before you want to try any big new initiative, check with the career staff, because chances are a previous administration, Democrat or Republican, may have tried the same thing. Some people go into new administrations believing anything the previous administration did has to be bad. That's absolutely not the case. I think I was able to succeed in DC because I was pragmatic and less partisan. And I think the career staff respected that I would come in there and say, look, we want to get these things done. And this is when I was deputy secretary at HUD. And I had that relationship with the career staff. And because of that, they trusted me, they knew me, and we were able to get a lot done because of that. Because you need the career attorneys to help you. You need the career program staff to help you. So there's a nonprofit called the Center for Public-Private Partnerships. Yeah. And I've spoken to the group a few times, and I said, well, I don't really want to speak to the political side. I want to speak to the career side, the leaders of the cabinet and independent agencies like SBA and NASA, and get their perspective. Because here they may get a new boss every 4 years. What corporation in America is the entire leadership wiped out every 4 years or every 8 years and then replaced with a whole new team, right? To the tune of thousands of people if you add up all the agencies. So that relationship is absolutely key. And people that don't listen and grow that relationship with the career staff will not succeed. They may get lucky, but they won't succeed.
Brian is
absolutely. Want to add anything to that, Holly? Go ahead.
Yes, Mike. I mean, Brian is absolutely right. I've learned, Brian, just because I was new in 2017, how key career staff was. And because I was asked, I was tapped on the shoulder and asked to come as a political appointee, the people that I knew and those that I was able to collaborate with, from the secretary to everybody that was appointed. But without career staff, you think about the organization. And I started the Department of Education, went to Commerce, and then went to HUD. Every organization has the back office, and really, I'm simplifying this, but there's policy and there's non-policy. You would think that even in my role as the Assistant Secretary for Administration for Management, which is like running the operations, would be non-political, but anybody can make it political. Meaning, yes, you're a political appointee, putting out policy on, HR policy, we're not going to like that. But that's far and few in between. If you take back office, it only makes sense to have an efficient back office policy for recruiting, for talent retention, for benefits administration. The same for procurement and acquisition, right? The same for, running any back office, if you will. And so who you would rely on are those that actually do the work year in and year out, day in and day out, regardless of who's sitting in the White House and actually the cabinet secretary. And if you are lucky, the one administration, a 4-year administration with one secretary, one head of the agency or office. And sometimes you have more than one. But Brian is right. Every 4 to 8 years, you wipe out the entire senior leadership. There's about 4,000 political positions. There's a presidential appointees that are Senate confirmed, presidential appointees that are not Senate confirmed, and then you have political appointees, Schedule Cs, and others. But all of those positions are wiped out. I don't mean wiped out, but as political appointee, we're asked to resign, and then the new administration brings theirs in. But your top senior layer, your top senior leadership from the cabinet secretary or head of the executive office to the deputy, to all the directors, assistant secretaries, they're gone. So everything from operations to policy to program offices. So it is a career staff. I'll give you an example though. If you're an IT programmer and you're an IT programmer at the Department of Education, the work that you do is not going to change because of policy, of administration shift. And I say that because you're still doing that type of programming work. Now the systems and when things will come in, that may change, right? Because of policies that the Department of Education may implement and who's going to come in as a vendor. But the back office functionality does not so much. And even with policy, you're going to see that career staff have ample years of policy. And it may sway, right, between the administration because administration points of view in their platform. But I hope that answers your question, Giovanni, especially for, the student. Public administration and public policy is so key. And I don't think this individual will go wrong, whether it's, taking that chance, as Brian had stated, to go work for a presidential candidate that does become then, sitting in the White House, or even going into, go to DC and actually work as a career official.
Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gio. So Peter, we'll allow you to ask your question. It says Shanghai, Peter. Do you mind if I ask? You're not in Shanghai, are you? Because the sun is out.
No. Thank you. I do work in Shanghai. I'm one of those guys that came over when COVID-19 happened, and I got stuck back here. My connection with University of Houston is that I'm, for better or for worse, I'm the first Masters of Law graduate of University of Houston in 1985, when the program was just getting started. But as an attorney, I focused obviously on representing American and international companies doing business in China. And so and at that point, I was an attorney at Shell Oil Company. And like everybody else, I had done time in Houston, 7 years of it. But having said that, I'm just fascinated by what you folks are saying. I'm currently just on the other side of Tyson's Corner. I am in DC because I keep a home over here. Over the years, I have a lot of clients going back and forth. But I have to say, as a guy that has focused my entire career on commercial matters, listening to both of you talk about your lives in the government, it's just so new and refreshing to me. I was at a reception last night, as you know, in DC now. There are tons and tons of reception, and I'm just here until I go back to Shanghai beginning of next year. But I'm just fascinated by the amount of infrastructure for congressional aides, for people that are supporting policies, very much to some of the things that Brian had mentioned. Different people have different agendas doing different things. And it's just so new to me because I'm, a believer in Benjamin Franklin and focus as an attorney and everything else on doing business. But there's this whole world that you folks are in that is just so fascinating to me. And I guess I learned something last night. People like yourselves, maybe lawyers as well, I don't know. You do get paid for advising for speaking. I mean, it's just so fascinating to me. So I want to say thank you so much for sharing this, and actually very proud that University of Houston graduates, actually, have done so well, politically and otherwise, having
Thank
grown up in the Phi Jamma Slamma days with Elijah, or whatever his name was back in
Yep.
those days in '85. So it's been a long ways, but thank you so much for sharing. I'm very glad to know you folks, and certainly want to hear more about your experiences working through the Washington D.C. maze, shall we say?
Thank you, Peter, very much. And before I let you guys answer, Peter sounds like an awfully interesting story himself, doesn't he? I know Carolyn's on our screen. She's writing down Peter's information because you sound like such an interesting alumnus yourself. So congratulations on your success as well.
Well, thank you.
Ollie or Brian, do you want to chime in on Peter's comment about the size of maybe some staffs and how things work in that space? And we'll let Kendra mute the various people, and Brian and Holly can go ahead and answer.
Well, I was hoping that you're in Shanghai. I was actually there with President Bush at the APEC conference. I think it was in 2002. President Jiang Zemin. And I got to attend the state dinner, and it was interesting hearing the People's Liberation Army band playing the Star Spangled Banner at the state dinner. It's really moving. And President Jiang asked Mrs. Bush to dance. And it was really an icebreaker, you're sitting there at this there in Beijing. Well, that was in Shanghai. Later we went to Beijing, but anyway, fascinating place, fascinating culture. I went back as recently as 2012, and hope to go back again. But just on the theme earlier about getting things done, an administration has priorities. They got elected because they want to do these 10 things. But there's another 1,000 that come in under the radar that aren't sort of high profile topics and issues, but they're very important to the day-to-day lives of everyone. And I'll give you some obscure example that has an enormous reach, is what's called the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, which is RESPA. And that's the federal law that governs the process by which people close a mortgage loan. Now, HUD used to have purview over that. It was transferred to the CFPB when that agency was created. But in 2009, it was the last rule implemented in the Bush administration was to reform that act, because it hadn't been reformed since 1974 when it was created. And we think because of the document being so outdated, consumers, home buyers, were at a disadvantage when they went to buy a home. They didn't understand the loan terms. They didn't understand the good faith estimate, what an APR is, what the fees are, what's permitted, the title insurance. So we worked very hard to make that document much simpler, much easier to read, to give consumers a better advantage. And it took 5 years to get that done, believe it or not. But it finally went into effect. And to my earlier point, the career staff were pushing it through, or rather the political staff, the career staff were helping. But that impacts everybody who buys a home every year. Millions of people depend on that document now. It's so important to get it right. Holly?
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian is right. I've been fortunate to have large staff and small. So I had 4 different roles in the last 4 years. My largest staff was 200 FTEs, and we had a pretty large budget. But nonetheless, there's all kinds of procedures. And I have to admit, and I know I'm right, and I don't think things are going to change. There is a lot of red tape and bureaucracy in government. So yes, you would think that issuing an HR policy would be pretty simple. Organizations do this all the time. But yes, there's a documented procedure, and then there's always some back and forth. And if it does get, heated, you have to go, it takes time. But I was fortunate to do that. I do want to just bring something up, just because, Peter, you also talked about, being there in Tyson's Corner, and you've been in Houston, and, you would be back in Shanghai, or you work all over the world. I'm proud to be an immigrant that came to this country at the age of 7 without a word of English. And then I'm a presidential appointee, 37 years later, in front of the president in the White House, working with the first lady, right, on her issues. And she was very much into cyberbullying and bullying prevention, or being with cabinet secretaries, and then meeting people like Brian, whose work is impacting hundreds of millions of homeowners. And I've been very fortunate. And I look at this and, it's that impact again, right? It's all the meetings you go to and all the documents you sign and the decisions that we make that has an impact on individuals and families and communities. But the story is, it is an American dream. Whether you were born and raised in Texas or elsewhere and want to go and work in the White House or DC, but as an immigrant from a blue collar family, through the University of Houston and its greatness, through all the different careers that led me through my network in Washington, DC, to be able to make an impact. And to me, this is probably mid-career, right? All the great network events and meeting people like Brian and some others, I don't know where this is going to take. But what I have learned is, even after 26 years, I think I have many other careers. So Mike, maybe we'll do this again in 10 years and we'll see where I am.
That's right.
But I think I'm more open-minded to where life can take you. But I never would have dreamt, right, as a young immigrant girl, that I would be in the White House making speeches on policy that impacts, for example, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, on the education aspect that pushes programs. And so that's just been, it just warms my heart to know that this country can provide that. One other thing, I just want to mention is there were sacrifices I had mentioned, but now that I look back, our children were 7 and 4, she had just turned 4. And, I think about what is it going to be like for them, the transition. The children are quite resilient, and every opportunity that we had, my daughter will say, yes, I've been in the White House 8 times. I've rolled on the grass of the South Lawn. I've seen the fireworks. And my son and I have bowled in the bowling alley, right? That's in the White House. I want them to take these memories and think about what it means for them when they're writing their term paper in high school, and then have their own dreams, right? But this really is such a great opportunity and such a great country where you can truly do anything that you set your heart to, and absolutely take those chances.
Thank you, Holly. Peter, thank you for your question. I hope, I guess I hope you're hoping to go back to Shanghai sometime soon. I hope you're still there in the spring in Tyson's Corner, because we're going to be coming to Washington, D.C. for an alumni event, and we'll make sure that you're invited to that event. So.
I have an event sometime around April. I think maybe we'll work it out. So
Okay,
look forward
perfect.
to it. And
So
Holly,
great to meet you.
in particular, I just want to say thank you for sharing. I appreciate all your comments, but one comment in particular I share is about being mid-career. I'm going to be 70 this year, and I feel like I'm just beginning my life. So,
Well, Peter, thank you so much. It's great to meet you, and thank you for your story as well. I'm looking at Carolyn Hartman, our Director of Communications, in the top of my screen, and she's jotting down notes. Call Peter immediately. That is a great story. We need to follow up. But so thank you so much, and good luck to you in the holiday season, and hopefully we'll meet face to face sometime soon. So, Brian and Holly, we're coming towards the end, so I want to ask kind of each of you, one thing. You're in public service generally, but everything's human, right? They always say all politics is local. All nature is human, right? And so I know you want to help people. What would you give advice-wise to the young people who are likely, when I push this video out, and I'm going to say it here, and it'll be awkward when they're watching it on recording. So those of you who are watching it on recording in political science, this is the point. I decided to make sure the political scientists got this recording. What are you going to say to the folks who are now watching it, who are going after, like Gio, who are going after their master's in political science, or they want to be in public service? They're 25, 27 right now. What does that path look like, or what advice would you give a young person at the University of Houston right now thinking about following the path that you've walked?
Sure. I'll say on the political science or public affairs or public administration side, definitely get your academic credentials. I grew up in kind of a different place where not everyone got a master's degree, but now it's almost, required to have a master's degree. And I know more attorneys up here who don't practice law than do. So it's, and you're competing for positions with people from the Northeast, from the South, from the Northwest. And, that's the beauty of this town. You meet people from all over. It's very interesting during football season, right? When you got people from the SEC, Big 12, AAC, whichever conference. But, and then, if get involved with a local Congress, man, congresswoman, senator, work on a campaign, even for, mayor, county commissioner. And then if you have the opportunity to work on a presidential campaign, do that. I mean, you if you're majoring in that field, you certainly have an interest in elective politics. And, what better place than to work for a president of the United States? And, I never thought I'd work in the executive office of the president, have an office in the West Wing. And I'll just tell you, if I could do it, anybody can do it. And
I was going to ask you a quick question too, Brian, and we'll get to Holly's answer. And I meant to ask this. So did you ever run into Philip Zelikow in your time in Washington, D.C.? Of course.
Yes. Yeah. Don't know him well, but certainly know him.
Also an alumnus of the University of Houston.
Yep. Well, and a former deputy secretary at Department of Homeland Security, was a University of Houston alumnus. And by the way, and I'll just say something for those who are a member of a fraternity or sorority, that network up here is massive as well. I mean, every school has an alumni group, but my fraternity too, I can't begin to tell me how many people in the Bush administration, Trump administration were in my fraternity. So, but getting back to the on the political science side, again, just don't think anything's impossible. I can assure you, if you work hard, you get your education, you meet a lot of people, you do sometimes the thankless work that no one else will do, you will get recognized and you will get noticed. And there's nothing more satisfying, as Holly mentioned earlier, than doing something to help your fellow Americans, your fellow citizens, in ways they don't even know about, but you know about it. It's enormously fulfilling, and allows you to, you'll work long hours, but when you do finally get to go home, you can think about it and reflect on all the good things you did that day. Are there pitfalls and hurdles along the way? Oh, you betcha. There's a lot of them. And I mean, you'll find yourself in some predicaments sometimes, and we'll share that for another time. But there are many warming events, working in administration. I mean, I got engaged, at the White House, for example. That's a good story, people tell me. We'll say that for another time. But who gets to do that? I mean, again, I just got lucky and came up with this crazy plan to get engaged at the White House and actually pulled it off. So you too can get engaged at the White House.
Thank you, Holly. We have just a couple minutes left. You want to add your final thoughts?
Absolutely. I was already engaged before and brought the kids there, but that would be spectacular to get engaged at the White House. I would echo everything that Brian had stated. The academic credentials, the involvement, you will get noticed. And those thankless jobs, someone is going to notice. And that someone actually is usually a leader that's going to continue tasking you with something that seems thankless. But everything that you do, I just want to leave this general comment, is that you've got to toot your own horn. You know better than anybody else all the good stuff you've done, all the great stuff that you've done, all the stuff that you think are unnoticed and go unappreciated. You are your best advocate. Who else would know about that? And the other is, who knows about the great work that you've done? Is it a classmate? Is it your best friend? Is it a family member? Is it a professor? You need those champions. You need those sponsors to also speak on your behalf, because you may not feel comfortable to do that. And then, at the end of the day, your credentials is not just on that resume, but who you are as a person, right? How are you in these networking events? How are you, just out socializing? Because as our life is under scrutiny, right? You can't be that crazy person and think that goes unnoticed. And so how do we carry ourselves? And that integrity goes a long way. And I think now is the platform to do it when you're still, on a college campus. Is it safe? Sure, it's safer than when you're actually getting paid or being tapped to do something else. But you've done great work. You've worked hard. You study well. You've done so much more than you think. goes into the resume, and people need to know about that. And so I think with that, you're definitely going to get no's, and also being at the right place at the right time and then picking up on those relationships. I mean, I cannot say enough about alumni relationship or just networking events across industries and areas, and just take it and run with it.
Well, thank you all so very much for sharing an hour with us today and sharing your experiences. It just shows you how big networking is and how small the world actually is, and how you'll run into somebody that, you know, it's that old 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon. I believe it's 2 degrees to a Houston Cougar. Somewhere 2 steps from you is a University of Houston alum or someone that knows a University of Houston alum. And I want to wish the best to each of you, the best of luck during the holiday season. I've already written down 7 or 8 more stories that you're going to be asked to tell at another time. So I do appreciate that. And thank you all both for everything that you do. Good luck in everything that you do. Thanks for being great University of Houston alumni. Have a great holiday season. And for all of you who joined us today, thank you so much for joining us. This broadcast does end fairly abruptly when they say goodbye. So don't be shocked by that. It just says show over. So on behalf of everybody at the University of Houston, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Holly, for your time today. Thank you, Kendra, for putting it together. Thank all of you for joining us today. Please check out all of our webinars at UH2U at our website at houstonalumni.com. Don't forget to join us on Cougs Connect at www.cougsconnect.com. Brian and Holly, I'm sure, already have their alumni apps downloaded on their phone. Make sure you have your alumni app downloaded on your phone. And from all of us to all of you, happy holidays. Go Cougs.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.